Toni Collette came to fame in her early 20s in the 1994 Australian film Muriel's Wedding. Since then, she has established herself on the international stage, earning an Academy Award nomination along the way. But Toni's journey to Hollywood stardom set out from humble beginnings.
My childhood, growing up with my brothers, was nothing but great. It was a small fibro house, you know, just enough bedrooms to squeeze us in. But it was fun.
Toni was born in Sydney in 1972, adding the extra E to her name in her teens. She's the eldest of 3 children to Robert, or Bob, Collette, and Judith Ann Cook.
Mum and Dad pretty much would do anything for us. We didn't have a lot of money and they just gave us the best life that they could.
But while Toni recalls her own upbringing fondly, she knows very little about her parents' parents.
I know that when my mum was very young, her mum died giving birth to her sister. And when that happened, her dad took off and all the kids in the family were kind of shipped off to different relatives to bring them up. It's really bloody sad. And Dad's dad may or may not be whom everyone assumed it to be. So that's a huge mystery as well.
So, with a question mark over her dad's parentage and her mother abandoned as a young child, on both sides, Toni's grandparents are an enigma. In search of a key to unlock the mystery, first stop is her mum and dad.
Hello, anyone home? Hello. How are you? Hi, Popsicle.
Oh, missed you.
Hi, baby. How are you? Good, how are you? I love you too.
First on the agenda is Mum, Judy. What does she know about the family tree?
This is the Bathurst show. That's me.
Mum, you're so cute. So is that your mum?
Yeah.
Toni's mother, Judith, was born in 1947 in Bathurst to Joseph William Cook and Ivy Myrtle Fowler.
What do you remember about your mum?
Very little. All I know,
How old were you when she died?
6.
She's a really young mum.
There's not a lot we know, just that she died having a baby.
Mm.
And there's your granddad, Joe and Ivy.
Is that some kind of uniform he's wearing?
Yeah,
Well,
it's an army uniform.
probably the 40s.
So what was his involvement, do you know?
No,
The army?
no.
What do you remember about Joe, about your dad?
Well, he wasn't around long after Mum died, from what I can remember, Toni. We all got farmed out, of course. Dad, he just sort of disappeared.
Judy was then raised by her father's sister, Lola. Her childhood memories aren't happy ones.
How did she treat you? I mean, it was just using you, really, it sounds like.
Yeah. The kitchen maid, I suppose you could say. She was good in some ways, but then again, I wouldn't want to put you or anyone through what I did. So. Oh. But I'm here now. See?
And then your mother got lucky.
Tell us about it, Dad. Now she's got colour television, right?
Colour television and a washing machine.
It's just heartbreaking. My mother's childhood is heartbreaking. We know so little, and any kind of information will just be a huge gift for all of us, but for Mum, it'll just be ridiculous.
Having heard what little oral history exists on her maternal grandparents, Toni is keen to see if official documents could cast further light on them.
Okay, so what I have here is my mum's parents' wedding certificate. Married in 1941, 23rd of March in Bathurst. He was 26, she was 22.
The marriage certificate is a sign of happier times. But what led to Joseph Cook later abandoning his children? Armed with more detail, Toni is now able to delve deeper in search of her errant grandfather.
Next of kin, Cook Ivy. We are on. Okay, now I'm going to click on this. Australian Military Forces. Mobilisation attestation form. Army number. This is what that uniform is. Enlisted for war service at Bathurst in 41. In 41, hang on, that's when they were married. What's he thinking? What's the date here when it was signed? So it's not even 2 months later. That's bonkers.
Does Joseph Cook's time in the army hold any clues to why he later left his family?
Tony, how you going?
Hi, really nice to meet you.
Carl James, senior historian from the Australian War Memorial, can decipher the military record.
I know that he was 26 when he volunteered to be in the army. He's a volunteer?
He's called up.
He was called up.
He
Why did I
was.
think he was a volunteer?
I think these days we have a volunteer military, so it's pretty easy to assume that would be the case, but not in Paul Joseph's case. So he's been conscripted to serve as a rifleman, as an infantryman. So after 4 months of basic training, he's then sent off to join his battalion, the 54th Battalion, and they're based at Bathurst. And then on the 9th of October, the battalion said, "No, you're unfit for duty," because the battalion was getting ready to be sent to Darwin.
Unfit for duty.
Unfit for duty in an infantry unit.
Right.
Pretty much for the rest of 1941 into 1942, he's just coming in and out of hospital, casualty clearing stations, health complaints. He's just moving in and out of the system.
His battalion dispatched to Darwin without him. Joseph remains in Bathurst, unfit for duty. But it's not just his health that's of concern to the army.
September of 1942, and it's found he's gone absent without leave. So he's just nicked off.
What is happening with this man?
So when he came back, a court of inquiry was held, and we're fortunate in Joseph's case that we have his testimony, his sworn statement.
I rang my mother and asked how my young brother was. He was in hospital at the time and she told me they would probably take off his leg the next morning. For that reason, I boarded the next train to Bathurst to see if I could stop my brother's leg being taken off. Wow. Why would he not have the opportunity to tell someone what's going on and do it legally?
This goes back to being a state of heightened emergency for Australia.
Yes.
So our soldiers are fighting the Japanese.
Yeah, it's
like
an
this
intense time.
This is a really intense time.
There has to be some order, I guess.
And this is a really sad story for Joseph and his family, but it's just one of tens of thousands that occurred during the war.
Right.
After his court-martial, the court were pretty lenient on Joseph. They just confined him to barracks and he received a fine. So basically it's like a little slap on the wrist. He returns back to his unit and within a couple more months, again he's in trouble. DCM is District Court Martial, charged with desertion this time. He's gone, we see down here, from the 9th of November 1942 until the 7th of May 1943. So he's just nicked off for nearly 6 months. And again, we have his own words explaining why he did what he did.
So he says, I asked for leave to see my wife before I came down, and that was granted. I went home and found she was in hospital. She was 5 months pregnant at the time, and the result was they had to take the child away, and she was very ill for some time afterwards.
The baby was stillborn.
Oh, I see. Taken away.
Taken away.
It's really sad.
It was very sad.
Joseph clearly had plenty of problems on the domestic front. But then the military tribunal hears about his medical history.
He then goes on to explain just some of the things that have happened to him.
I had an injury to my back at one stage that when I was working as a civilian on the building of Bathurst military camp, a barrel load of cement fell and caught me on the back, ouch, and I've suffered from that ever since. I cannot do any heavy work. They had me on marching at St Albans, but I couldn't stand up to it. Oh my God, poor bastard.
And in the end, the military doctors provide their own assessment of Joseph, and they have it in some detail here.
Small build, pale, sallow and anxious-looking man with a tremor in his hands and moist palms. This man is totally unfit for army life and should never have been enlisted. God, they figured it out.
So mid-1943, he's finally discharged.
It took 2 years.
Joseph's military record is dogged by family tragedy and ill health. But there is a silver lining.
What we also know from his service record is that he would have been entitled to 2 medals, the British War Medal and the Australian Service Medal. And that's just the official recognition of his time in the military, saying, yep, you did your bit. And it's pretty clear from his service record that he didn't claim those medals, but he's certainly entitled to them.
So no one's claimed them?
Not yet.
So going to claim them? Wow. Mum's going to freak. So, it seems Grandpa Joe was a bit of a rebel, which I like. He just did whatever he wanted. I mean, reading into it, it just seemed like family came first, and no matter what world he was in, he would just make whatever decision he needed to make in order to take care of his family.
Toni has come to Bathurst, 200 kilometres west of Sydney, where her grandfather Joseph served during World War II.
Hi.
Hi, Toni. I have a small presentation here for you. These 2 awards are for N195026, Private Joseph William Cook, for recognition of his service. If you look at the medal to your left, it is the War Medal, and it has King George VI on the front. And if you'd like to turn that one over, it has a lion on a fallen dragon on the rear. The next medal is the Australian Service Medal. It has our coat of arms on the rear.
Thank you.
You're welcome. He's a bit of a character, I hear.
Yeah, I'm figuring that out. Thanks. This'll mean a lot to my mum.
Joseph Cook walked away from his family when Toni's mum was just 6, leaving precious few memories and mementos.
And the thing I find most moving, I think, is because they've just been sitting there since the early 40s. But no one really knowing that they existed or that he owed them. For his funny little 2-year stint in the army where he didn't do much. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm not one for medals, but it does mean something. And, you know, he's not around, so it's the closest I'll ever get.
After an army career cut short by ill health, Joseph returned to his wife, Ivy, but their troubles were only just beginning. Toni Collette knows that grandmother Ivy died in childbirth. What led to the tragedy and the consequent breakup of the family? In the event of an unexplained death, an inquest would have been held. At Bathurst Courthouse, historian Madonna Grean has the report into grandmother Ivy's death.
So, Toni, we have a copy of the inquest undertaken in this very courtroom.
In this very room?
Yes, in this very room.
Far out.
Ivy and her baby died on the 2nd of March 1953, and the inquest was undertaken 11 days later on the 13th.
So 10 years after his discharge from the army, Joseph Cook finds himself in the coroner's court, describing the death of his wife and child.
This is the testimony of your grandfather.
The deceased, Ivy Myrtle Lottie Cook, was my wife. Besides myself and the deceased, I do not know of anyone else who was aware of her condition. She had not sought medical attention. She was rather shy regarding these matters. On the 1st of March 1953, I retired to bed at about 8:30. During the early hours of the following morning, I was awakened by my wife getting in and out of bed. She was suffering dysentery. She wanted to get up and go to work. I insisted that she stay in bed. I went to work that morning. I next returned at about 12:30 p.m. when my wife was laying on the floor. She was unconscious and there was a lot of blood about, and I lifted her up and put her on the bed. When I turned around to go out into the kitchen, I saw the baby on the floor. She must have been laying on top of it. I then had a closer look at the baby and I noticed it was dead. Far out. Oh man, imagine walking in on that. My God. And where were the other kids?
There were 4 children, so there's 2 toddlers in the house and there are 2 children at school.
See, I'm really unsure about the order of my mum's siblings.
I think your mum is number 2.
So she would have been at school.
I have a summary of what the doctor determined was the cause of death of the baby.
The cause of death was compatible with the woman having overlain the child in emotional stress of having a baby in a room by herself. The death would be suffocation.
This is a deposition of the constable assisting, Constable Williamson.
Okay, he says the child was wrapped in a pyjama coat, which was lightly blood-stained. The umbilical cord of the child had been cut. I also found a pair of blood-stained scissors on a dressing table in the bedroom. There are no suspicious circumstances. So she cut the umbilical cord and...
She cut the umbilical cord and she wrapped the baby up. So she knew what to do. But it's probably then that she fainted and fell on the baby. So Joseph then continues his testimony about what happened to Ivy after that point.
On regaining consciousness, I asked her if she knew what had happened, and she said yes. I said, I better get a doctor, and she said she didn't want one. She said to put the baby in a box so the young kiddies couldn't see it. I said I'd have to report the baby, and she said, leave that until you finish your work. You can do that after. I picked up the baby and put it in a box, which I put in the wardrobe. This is full on. It's going to pop the baby in a box and put it in the wardrobe and we'll deal with it later.
There are 2 toddlers in the house and they're trying to protect the family from this terrible circumstance and this site. So really she's thinking of her children.
I tried to clean the blood up a bit in the room and gave my wife an Aspro and some water. She seemed fairly well then. After that, I went back to work. I next returned home. My wife seemed all right. About 11:30, she woke me up. She further complained about having pains in her stomach. I said, I better go and get a doctor, Mum. She told me that if I got a doctor, she would never speak to me again. My wife seemed to be straining herself.
So the fact that she's straining herself means the placenta's still in situ. She cut the cord, but
didn't clamp.
It wasn't clamped in the way that we know it needs to happen, and so the placenta is still in situ, so that explains why she's straining.
Then he goes on to say, I tried to knock up the nearest doctor but could not knock him up at all. I went and rang another doctor and some woman answered the phone and said the doctor would not be back until Wednesday.
Finally, after 4 attempts, Joseph found medical help.
It's taken him an hour to find a doctor by knocking on people's doors and by telephoning.
Oh, that's so desperate.
Yes, it is desperate. It's grim, really grim.
I got home about...
I got home about 5 or 6 minutes before the ambulance. I could see the wife was dead then. My wife said she would not have medical aid and that is why she did not seek aid before her death. I did not think she was going to die as she did. What I don't understand now is if he loved his family so much and he's got these kids, he took off, Mum says. He took off after Ivy died.
If you think about the age of the children who are suddenly motherless, they need a lot of attention. You know, most welfare departments of governments did not allow men to bring up children in that way. Children were institutionalised or left with relatives to look after. Yeah. What's interesting is that the Bathurst papers reported that Joseph was devastated giving his evidence.
It's just such a horrible accident, which, you know, then led on to my mum having such a shitty childhood. And I just wish it had never happened.
Number 7 is what I'm looking for now.
Dead at the age of 36, grandmother Ivy's last resting place is in the nearby Bathurst Cemetery.
6. Here we are.
There's just nothing here. Oh, Ivy, I am so sorry. Here she is, completely unrecognised. There's no marking at all. My perspective and my understanding of my grandfather has changed so greatly in the last few days. And I guess this is as far as I'm going to get in Bathurst, so I'll now try to find out more about where Joe is and what happened to him after Ivy died, where he went, where life took him. So I'll head back to town.
So what became of Joseph Cook after his wife died? Back in Sydney, Toni picks up the trail of her grandfather. The next time he appears on the public record is on a marriage certificate.
Okay, so I did a little bit more research and I found out that Joe remarried a couple of years later to a woman called Valma. They were both living in Surrey Hills, not far from here. He was on Albion Street, she was on Campbell Street, and they got married in Balmain. So I'm going to try and find out a bit more now that I have this information.
After you, please.
Thank you.
Retired police detective turned historian, Ralph Staveley, has managed to uncover more traces of Joseph Cook and his new bride, Valma. Given their meeting in an old prison, it doesn't bode well.
The sad part is that only a couple of years later, she and Joseph are in trouble with the law in Melbourne. This is a document you need to look at.
Who's that?
That's Joseph.
What, has he been completely bashed up?
Look, it looks worse than it is, really. It was associated with one of these charges. The D&D is actually drunken disorderly.
Look how many there are. Drunken disorderly, drunken disorderly, drunken disorderly.
Yeah.
It's every few days.
Pretty much.
He broke in to a house.
Yeah.
Larceny, indecent language. So the sentences are £5
He gets
or
£5 or 14
days.
days, so then he's to Pentridge. He can't pay the money.
What is he doing?
He's got limited education. The only thing he can do in life is be a labourer, but he's 5'4". He's not labouring material.
Approaching middle age, plagued by ill health and alcoholism, and virtually unemployable, Joseph was now living in Victoria with his second wife.
That's Valma.
That's Valma.
Oh man, she looks rough.
They both appear at Collingwood Court with a larceny. One thing that's interesting is the address.
Humpy Boulevard, Kew.
A humpy on the boulevard in Kew.
They live in a humpy, a tin humpy.
A humpy. It's the most basic accommodation. No sanitation, no running water, no stove, no nothing.
In the aftermath of World War II, Australia was beset with chronic housing shortages, and Melbourne was no exception. Returning servicemen, incoming migrants, the poor and dissolute, all competing for homes that just weren't there. Former army camps were used to try and ease the problem, but at the bottom of the ladder were those like Joseph and Valma, who couldn't even find a place in the homeless camps, and instead built their humpy out of whatever scrap materials existed. 15 years later, in 1960, the humpies were still there in the heart of Melbourne and home to Joseph and Valma. But Joseph Cook wasn't only on a downward spiral. He was also repeating his personal history.
And the last charge?
Joseph Cook,
Yeah.
fail, provide for children.
Yeah. They're both charged with that.
So they've got kids
They have 2 children.
that they can't care for and they end up
Well,
in jail. He's in jail for 6 months because he can't provide for his
he
kids.
appealed against that.
Oh, jeez.
And the judge
Oh, it
has
was reduced to 2
And
months.
it's reduced. There's some sympathy there for the plight he's in, but the children are taken into, well,
Foster
interstate care. Yes.
So when is this? 61.
61.
And do you know how old they are or the details of the kids?
They're both young. They're both under 7.
So now Joseph has basically
Yes.
lost 6 kids.
That's right.
And 2 more that died.
Yeah.
These poor bastards. He had no luck. It was just tough times the whole way.
Ralph has given Toni one more document relating to her grandfather.
Oh, God. What could possibly come now? I'm actually a little bit nervous to open it. But I've got to read it. Yeah. Man hit by a car was under influence. It was obvious that a man who died after being knocked down by a car in Shepparton on June 8 had been considerably under the influence of liquor at the time. The coroner was inquiring into the death of Joseph William Cook, aged 47. Poor guy. It's my grandfather. And, you know, in the end, he was put in jail because he was poor, basically. He couldn't take care of his kids. He was jailed for poverty. So, yeah, that's a sad end to his life.
Having discovered more about the life and times of her maternal grandfather, Joseph Cook, Toni now has to tell her mum.
I'm feeling a little bit of trepidation about revealing all that I found. I mean, I found it difficult to take it all in, and despite an obvious connection, it's Mum's dad. It's hers. So I'm feeling a bit of anxiety. I met with a military historian who told me all this information, and he also told me that there were some medals owing to him. So I went out to meet. There was a representative from the army, and I went to the memorial centre in Bathurst and got them for you.
Oh, I wish you'd have been there. Oh, golly. That's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Things you don't know.
I know. There's a lot you don't know. Here they are. So there are two different ones. One is for being in the army, and one is for being a part of the war. Not that he, did much, but here they are.
There you go. There you go, Joe.
There he is. He was constantly being pulled up for drunken disorderly behaviour. Look at that mug shot of him, will you?
That's awful.
I know. Look at him. Look at his face. It's so hard. He's
been belted.
Yeah, he looks
Don't
like
you love the
boxer.
love the bandage?
In looking through all this, I really originally did think that he was selfish for taking off, but he kind of had no other choice. And he did what he thought was best for you kids.
Yeah.
I know it's horrible, but I really do think it's probably better to know than not know. She's such a sweetheart. This has been hanging over her head for most of her life. And then to get all that information in one sitting is a lot.
Toni now turns the focus on her father, Bob. His mother, Norma, is the only grandparent Toni ever knew.
The very fabulous Norma Ruby.
Gorgeous thing.
Born in November 1946, Bob Collette is the second child to Norma Ruby McWhinney and Harold Stanley Collette, known as Big Stan. They divorced when Bob was still young, and he grew up estranged from the man whose name he carried.
I never had a relationship with what we call Big Stan, but later on in life I did confront him about our relationship. And I probably did it at the wrong time, in the wrong place, and all that sort of stuff. And
What did he say when you did
well,
it?
he said to me, and he said, I'm not your father. And of course, that's the first conversation as an adult, really.
Was Nan still alive at that point?
Yeah. You've got to understand with your grandmother, because of the privacy and the dignity, and never wanted to bring it up with me either.
But among Norma's possessions is a possible clue.
What is that? A very
It's
old letter.
it's an old letter. It's this is your grandmother actually wrote this while she was in the nursing home. She'd had a stroke, as you remember.
Yeah.
The letter, written in later life by Toni's grandmother, Norma, was to an address in the US, but it was unopened and marked return to sender.
It's Irving H. Robachek.
Robachek, yeah, Robachek.
Okay, dear Irving, I hope this letter finds you well and happy. I thought about you at Christmas, as every Christmas. Haven't had very good health the last few years. Had a stroke in 1983 down my left side. And walking again with the aid of a quad stick and rehabilitation, my speech and my mind is okay. Nan, my thoughts have been with you always over the years. I think my dad took the letter you wrote with your army address. I had it in my dressing table drawer. When I went to get it, it was gone, so if any mail came later on, Dad would probably destroyed it. I hope this letter finds you. It would be wonderful to hear from you. You weren't very happy or well when you wrote, so I hope your life and your health has improved. Love to you always, Norma.
This fella left an impression with her for the rest of her life.
And she obviously cares a lot about him.
So that leaves, that just leaves doubts in my mind. And would this fella be my dad? I don't know. The mystery continues.
Right, so Dad, it's 2015. I think it might be time to do
Time's
that
moving on.
DNA test. TikTok, you know what I'm saying?
Well, that's
Not
what,
just for you,
you
for
know,
me.
No, that's it. It's not just for you, and it actually goes past you.
It's for the entire family.
Oh, entire family where your heritage is, and I've always really wanted to know, obviously, and I've got to tell you that we had a DNA test. We haven't got a result yet, but yeah.
You little shit! When did you do that?
Not telling you, I don't spill blood for everyone. So. But
When will you know?
well, not just yet. Well, yeah, soon.
I can't believe he's finally done the DNA test. That will bring forth a whole heap of information. And then there's this beautiful letter that my grandmother wrote to a man that she clearly cared deeply about. So it's all very intriguing and exciting.
So who is her biological grandfather? Toni is about to learn that her family history is even more complicated than she realised. While Toni Collette waits for the results of her father's DNA test, she wants to know what lay behind Big Stan's late life claim that Bob was not his son. She heads to the New South Wales Records Office in search of traces of Norma and Stan, her official paternal grandparents. Family historian Shirley Swain has been digging into the archives. Norma and Big Stan were married in 1941, but the honeymoon period was short-lived.
We know about the marriage comes from divorce papers. They're dated from 1945. Norma's clearly quite keen to be out of the marriage because she provides this.
To whom it may concern, I, Norma Collette, have committed adultery with someone whose name I do not wish to mention for reasons of my own. Come in, Spinner. Oh, my God.
Yes. In the papers here, we can see the kind of progress of the deterioration of the marriage. In 1944, in May 1944, she's writing to Stan.
This is the most difficult letter I've ever had to write, and it is only after much thought I do so. I've been trying to tell you for some time now that I don't feel the same towards you and I don't wish to live with you as your wife again. It makes me very unhappy to have to tell you this, but I think deep down in your heart you have known this. Believe me, Stan, I really did try to make you happy when you were last home. Please try to forgive me. Your wife, Norma. Okay.
And so in the papers he presents to the court, he explains what he did on receipt of that letter.
I returned home on leave from Darwin, and shortly after returning home, I had a conversation with my wife. I said to my wife, "What do you mean by writing this letter, and what is the whole trouble?" She replied, "Now that you're home, I will tell you I don't love you. I don't want to settle down to married life. While you were away, I committed adultery." I then said to her, "What is the name of the person with whom you committed adultery?" She said, "That's none of your business. That is my affair. I'm prepared to give you a confession, but I won't tell you his name. He is an American."
Again, she's being adamant she's not going to give him up.
While Norma seems determined not to name names, she makes no secret of her newfound freedoms, as witnessed in an affidavit by a mutual friend of both Stan and Norma.
I saw the respondent on no less than 7 occasions visit the said Capitol Theatre at night, accompanied each time by an American serviceman. The last time I saw the respondent was in the month of August 1944, when I said to her, "Don't you think you're making it a bit hot on your husband?" She said, "My husband and I are finished." I said, "Why?" She replied, "I'm going to marry an American serviceman." I said, "What's his name?" She replied, "That is my affair." It certainly was her affair. My God.
It was her affair, and she wasn't going to tell it for anybody or anything.
Nana.
And what she meant there was that she didn't want him to have to be named as correspondent when he would have had to appear in the court, could have had bad publicity, and could have been made to pay the costs for the divorce.
And if confessional letters from Norma and affidavits from witnesses are not enough, one final bit of evidence nails the divorce case.
Somehow, these photographs get into the file. They don't have any identifying on them, so we don't know, but it's meant to be evidence that she was with an American serviceman.
She looks pretty damn happy.
She does look very happy, doesn't she? She doesn't look like the woman writing those miserable letters to Stan.
Okay.
So the divorce is granted with no name attached as to who this person is.
Wow. How do we find out who this is exactly?
That is beyond these papers to tell us. The decree nisi, which was granted in 1945, isn't the divorce, it's just the first step in the divorce. The decree absolute in this case is not granted until 2 years later in 1947. That's a long time.
And my dad's born smack bang in the middle of those dates.
Born in the middle of those dates.
It's highly unlikely that my grandmother and Stan created my father. Oh, this is like, you know, finding gold. This is so incredible because, first of all, it pretty much confirms that Big Stan is not my father's father. And this elusive lover that my grandmother has had, I have seen him. This is him. I mean, it's got to be. It's not some ruse to get through the divorce. She provided a picture. She looks genuinely so happy with him. It's got to be Irving. It's got to be.
Having at long last agreed to take a DNA test to help solve the family mystery, Toni's father has left her in charge of the next step. Now, the results are in.
The testing was conducted to confirm whether Robert Collette and Stanley Collette share a common paternal lineage. Okay, there's a bunch of numbers. I've no idea what that means. Result. They do not share identical Y chromosomes. You know what Dad's going to say? I really am a bastard. Okay, well, there you have it. I assumed this was going to be the outcome, but far out. This is solid information. Okay, so now I am looking up an American archival site. Oh, man, I've got to find this guy. My grandfather. Here we go. Yep. Okay. He's got an Army serial number, Irving H. Robachek. Resident state, Minnesota. He's a white citizen. He had 1 year of college. Married. Marital status, married. In all likeliness, this is him, but there's no mention of coming to Australia at all, although he is in the Army across the period when he would have been here. This is great information, but I don't know if I can get anything out of it. I think I need some help because I don't quite understand what a lot of it means. I've got to find out if this is the same guy in the photo.
Toni Collette has found photos of an unnamed man in her grandmother's divorce papers. Is he the same man Norma wrote letters to later in life, Irving Robicek? At the Society of Australian Genealogists, Carol Riley has been enlisted to help.
Well, I have his American service record.
Oh, great.
He was assigned to the Southwest Pacific Theatre of Operations from February 44 to September 45.
Okay, I have something here about the dates when he was in Sydney.
Okay.
This guy worked at the Capitol Theatre and he saw my grandmother in the month of August 1944.
Well, he was definitely in the area.
He was.
Yes. So the Southwest Pacific Theatre took in Australia, the Pacific, Asia, New Guinea. Yes.
Stroke, but it's a highly
There were major
positive stroke.
bases in Australia, so they came back here for leave.
World War II saw a big influx of Americans into Sydney, and Australian women were encouraged to make them feel welcome as part of the war effort. The Americans were often charming, worldly, better dressed and better paid than their Australian counterparts.
Well, we're so glad to see you that you have this on the house.
Hotels, clubs and theatres came alive to cater for them and their female companions. Romance blossomed, and by war's end, ships were transporting brides and children to their new homes in the US.
I have his departure back to the United States. The passenger list.
Okay, Irving Herman Robicek.
So he's leaving from Yokohama,
I
Japan.
see,
Okay.
on November 21st, 1945, and he arrives into LA on the 18th of December, 1945. Shit, hang on a minute. Dad was born in the beginning of November 1946, and he left November 21st, 1945. So, unless he came back...
He would have had to come back.
He wasn't around, according to what I've seen so far.
No, I haven't found anything for him coming back.
You haven't?
No.
Bugger.
The dates don't add up for Irving Robicek to have been Bob's father. But is he the man in the photograph with Norma? Carol has followed the trail further.
I found him in a cemetery index where we have a sort of an obituary.
Oh.
So he died in 92.
Retired Lieutenant Colonel, so he
was
he pushed on in
career soldier.
Yeah. He's survived by his wife Heidi and 2 daughters Linda and Anne, a son Michael, and 3 grandchildren.
I've spoken to Heidi, his widow.
And
I asked her for a photo.
Well, that's not the guy in the photo.
I don't think so.
This guy was a decoy. I want to see the real deal, and this is not the right guy. What's going on? Carol, do you know anything else?
I don't know anything else.
Oh, this is not... What? But the letters are from him. I mean...
The letters are from him. He kept up a, pen pal relationship with your grandmother.
Was that common? Right.
They come over here, they're lonely, they're at war, they go out dancing and they meet a girl and they start writing.
Okay, so who's Dad's dad?
There were 1 million American service people came through Australia over the period of the war from 41 to 46.
Whoa. How the hell am I going to find this man? Okay, Mr. Mystery Man. Who is this mystery man?
Toni Collette has discovered that her nan's wartime pen pal, Irving Robicek, is probably not her biological grandfather. Nor is he the one in the snapshot with Norma. So who is the mystery man? With only a photograph to work from, Toni now needs to try and find a needle in a haystack.
Matt, how are you?
Military historian Matt McLaughlin may be able to help.
All right, Matt, were you able to find out anything from the picture?
Well, I've blown these up to have a really good look at them because obviously we want to know as much as we can. He's wearing an American uniform and we can tell he was in the US Navy during the Second World War.
The Navy?
That's what we can tell. This is a naval uniform. It's a little bit difficult to make out, but that pin on his hat, that's an anchor and the letters USN, US Navy.
I can see the anchor now that you
That's
pointed
right.
out.
The next thing we did was we looked at this patch on his arm. This is probably the most important thing to tell us about this man, just from looking at this photo. So the patch tells us a couple of things. Firstly, there's 3 stripes here, 3 chevrons and a bar, which indicates he's not an officer. He's an enlisted man.
Okay.
And this actually tells us his rank is the highest rank of enlisted man, so sort of petty officer rank. The other important thing to focus on is this little blurry symbol here, which is hard to see. This is called the rating. This tells us what branch of the Navy he served in, so it tells us what sort of job he would have done.
Yes.
So we looked this up, and what I've discovered is that's commissary. And now commissary deals basically with food for the enlisted men. So when we combine these factors, what we end up with is that his rank and what he did in the Navy was a chief commissary steward, a CCS, and basically the CCS was in charge of running the food, running the kitchen on the ship for all the enlisted men. There was only one chief commissary steward on each ship.
It's actually a huge responsibility, isn't it? It's a huge job.
It's a huge job. I mean, an army runs on its stomach, a Navy is the same.
Yeah. Is there a possibility of finding out his name or...?
Well, that brings us to this point. Records were very scant and we haven't been able to identify him with just a photo and with no name.
Even though he would have been the only guy on the ship.
We have been through
Controlling
muster
food.
records. We have looked at the ships that have come in and out. We've posted messages to websites. The problem is that your grandmother was obviously a woman who she didn't want us to know who he was. She didn't want anyone to know who he was. She gave the bare minimum of information.
Yeah, she stated that. She
had
didn't want
to.
anyone to know.
And unfortunately, she did a fantastic job.
Oh, bloody hell. Well, I mean, that's all really interesting, but is he?
So a key piece remains missing from the jigsaw, the identity of the man in the photograph, possibly Toni's biological grandfather. Toni returns to her parents' home to break the news to her dad, Bob.
How's it going, Dad?
Getting a bit nervous, but anyway, we'll be fine.
Okay, well, should we start? So I have the result of your DNA test.
All right.
I'm going to let you read it, so get your glasses.
Okay, I just happen to have a pen right here, so... Conclusion, the result excludes shared paternal lineage for Robert Collette and Stanley Collette. Well...
So Stan's not your dad.
Maybe it's right what you said.
What? What did I say?
I'm a real bastard. Oh, dear. Suspected. This is confirmed, so...
Yeah. Well, now, yeah, it's
Well, after
confirmed. There it is in black and white.
68 years I waited for this. Wow.
Nan was really trying to protect she and her new partner. And she didn't give his name up. She wouldn't do it. They kept asking. They kept saying, we need a name. She said no.
Mm-hmm.
But what she did provide...
Oh, okay. Well, these pictures, where the hell did you get these pictures?
From the divorce papers. They were in there as part of the case.
Really?
Yeah.
Right, so this is...
Your father.
How do we know that? He's got hair. How can it be Dad? Who's this one?
That's Irving Robertchak.
Oh, he's losing his hair, God bless him.
It's not the same man.
Oh, we've changed ships.
Irving was a friend that Nan had that she kind of wrote to in a pen pal fashion.
Yep.
And they obviously, you know, it was a relationship that was meaningful to her, but it wasn't the one.
This is the one.
That's the one.
We got a name?
We don't have a name.
Oh, bugger.
But we do know that Nan was happy.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the most important thing to us. That she was happy she found someone she could share with. Does he look like me?
Yes, Dad.
Do you think?
What do you think, Mum?
Oh, my God. You got the same lips for a start. They're thin lips.
Yeah.
Spectre.
Jude.
Look, it really, it's the same chin.
thin lips. Your
Just
mother's
keep your
always
mouth
dirty.
closed. Shut up. Can you just look? Try not to smile. They're the same lips. Dad!
That's what I picked up first. His
Oh
lips.
my God.
He looks like a good bloke.
I know, right?
Yeah, he does look like a good bloke. No, he looks like a calm person. I think he looks like a calm
He just looks
person.
grounded to me.
Well, we're complete poles apart there, but...
To keep this man's name, his identity from everybody, and she was very thorough. We cannot find it. Everyone has some secrets, and I can understand that she didn't want to reveal it all. It was personal and it was important, and it was kind of frowned upon given the context of when it happened. Mum and Dad are amazing. They were able to kind of turn it around in one generation. They just came from such pain and such broken, scrappy lives of, you know, just messy relationships and emotional pain, and they have poured all of that into a blender, and they've turned it around, and they are so giving and so understanding.